covering the WNBA this past season, Caitlin Clark's rookie year, for all of the conversation that surrounded her, some which was fair and some which wasn't, the one thing that I cannot deny is the amount of little girls that were showing up to follow her, little girls with their parents.
International media heavyweight Katty Kay just dropped a bombshell on the WNBA. The respected BBC journalist openly favored Caitlin Clark over Angel Reese during her latest interview, sending shockwaves through women's basketball. While discussing the explosive growth of the women's game, Kay couldn't help but highlight Clark's transformative impact while dismissing Reese's contributions.
I was just about to say same thing for Angel Reese when I had a chance to cover their games, but I think Caitlin represented, and again, some of this to me probably is not fair to her because it was not anything that she said or was truly based on her personality, but she was a white girl from the middle of America. And so she represented a whole lot to a lot of people, whether that is truly what she prescribed to or not. We can all.
This unexpected take from a major global news figure reveals how Clark's influence has transcended American media and captured international attention. Kay's comments expose the deepening divide that's reshaping women's basketball forever.
The WNBA has been around for a while. The Women's Championship has been around for a long time. You've covered the sport. You played for Georgetown. How do you account for what happened last year when suddenly as many Americans were watching the women's college basketball as they were watching the men's?
Honestly, Katty, I would venture to say that more folks were watching the women's tournament than the men's, ultimately. It's a culmination of a lot of things as I reflect on my experience as a women's basketball player and now as a member of the media.
During a recent interview discussing the explosive growth of women's basketball, Kay's comments revealed a clear preference for Caitlin Clark's style and impact, while essentially sidelining Angel Reese's contributions to the sport's rising popularity. This wasn't just casual commentary. This was a seasoned global journalist making a definitive statement about who she believes is truly driving the women's basketball revolution.
Now, I will add the additional layer, and some folks may want to argue about this, but based on my lived experience in this country, the Larry Bird Magic Johnson effect of it all, that is to speak of the two representations of two different worlds when you talk about Iowa and LSU, it's a culminating ingredient in how we get to this big time moment that crosses into mainstream sports conversation.
Let's start by examining exactly what went down in this interview. Kay was speaking with Monica McNutt, a former Georgetown basketball player and current analyst, about the remarkable surge in viewership for women's college basketball.
I interviewed Magic Johnson not long after, in about early last summer, and I asked him about the phenomenon of Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese, and had they really changed the game for good? Had they changed the whole business model?
While discussing the factors behind this explosive growth, Kay specifically highlighted Caitlin Clark as the primary catalyst, referring to her as a phenomenon who had changed the whole business model of women's basketball. The way Kay framed her questions and comments positioned Clark as the central figure in this basketball revolution, while Reese was mentioned almost as an afterthought. What makes Kay's perspective particularly noteworthy is that she's not just another American sports commentator. She's a veteran British journalist with a global audience and reputation for measured, thoughtful analysis. When someone of Kay's stature weighs in so decisively on this debate, it signals that Clark's impact has transcended American sports media and captured international attention. In one particularly telling moment, Kay specifically asked whether the surge in popularity was sustainable beyond the Caitlin Clark effect, implying that Clark was the driving force behind the viewership explosion. She referenced a conversation she had with Magic Johnson about Clark's game-changing potential, without making similar references to Reese's impact. This wasn't just casual preference. Kay's framing suggested a clear hierarchy in her mind about who deserves credit for women's basketball's current moment in the spotlight, and that hierarchy had Caitlin Clark firmly at the top. What's fascinating about Kay's perspective is how it contradicts the narrative that some American media outlets have pushed. While many U.S. commentators have been careful to present Clark and Reese as equal contributors to the sport's growth, Kay's outsider perspective cut through that diplomatic approach. She saw Clark as the primary draw, the player whose skill and marketability had truly transformed the women's game. Kay's comments also touched on a crucial factor that many analysts have been reluctant to discuss openly: the demographic appeal of different players. Without explicitly saying it, Kay acknowledged that part of Clark's massive popularity stems from her ability to attract audiences who hadn't previously followed women's basketball. She referred to the Larry Bird Magic Johnson effect, a clear allusion to how that legendary rivalry bridged different fan demographics and expanded the NBA's appeal. The BBC journalist's analysis went beyond just player comparisons. She expressed genuine curiosity about whether women's basketball could maintain this momentum without relying on specific personalities. This question reveals something important about how international observers view the current WNBA landscape. They see it as highly dependent on Clark's star power, rather than a broader structural change in how women's sports are perceived. McNutt's response to Kay's framing was diplomatic but telling. While acknowledging Clark's massive impact, she carefully tried to bring the conversation back to multiple stars, including Reese. She mentioned how both players had become household names and referenced the two representations of two different worlds when talking about Iowa and LSU. This careful balancing act contrasted with Kay's more direct focus on Clark. What makes this interaction so significant is that it exposes the underlying tensions in how different media figures and fans perceive the Clark-Reese dynamic. Kay, unencumbered by the political considerations that often influence American sports media, felt free to express what many observers quietly believe, that Clark's impact on growing the game has been singular and transformative in a way that exceeds any other player's contribution. The subtext of Kay's comments also touches on marketability. When discussing the commercial viability of women's basketball, Kay specifically mentioned Clark's appeal to advertisers and brands. She noted how Clark has become a marketing powerhouse, with major companies eager to associate with her image. This commercial appeal is a crucial factor in the long-term growth of any sport, and Kay clearly sees Clark as the player who has most successfully bridged the gap between athletic excellence and mainstream marketability. Perhaps the most revealing moment came when Kay directly addressed the racial and cultural dynamics at play in women's basketball. She acknowledged that Clark was a white girl from the middle of America, who represented a whole lot to a lot of people. This frank assessment of the demographic factors influencing player popularity is something many American commentators have been reluctant to discuss openly. Kay's willingness to acknowledge these dynamics without apology or excessive qualification demonstrates the value of an international perspective. She was able to articulate what many observers understand but few express directly, that part of Clark's massive popularity stems from her ability to appeal to demographics that haven't traditionally followed women's basketball closely. However, it would be a mistake to interpret Kay's comments as dismissive of Reese's talents or importance. Rather, her analysis was focused on market impact and commercial appeal rather than basketball skills alone. She was offering a clear-eyed assessment of who she believes has had the greatest impact on expanding the audience for women's basketball. McNutt, to her credit, tried to maintain a more balanced perspective, repeatedly bringing Reese back into the conversation and emphasizing that both players have tremendous respect for each other. But Kay's questions and comments consistently steered the discussion back to Clark's singular impact, revealing her view that Clark has been the primary catalyst for the sport's recent explosion in popularity. What makes Kay's perspective particularly valuable is that it comes from outside the echo chamber of American sports media. She's not caught up in the ongoing debates and political considerations that often shape how U.S. commentators discuss the Clark-Reese dynamic. Her outsider status allowed her to express what many observers believe, but are sometimes reluctant to state directly, that Clark has become the face of women's basketball globally, in a way that transcends any other current player. The timing of Kay's comments is also significant. With Clark's rookie WNBA season approaching, and the expectations for her professional debut reaching fever pitch, Kay's endorsement of Clark's transformative impact adds to the mounting evidence that her star power extends far beyond traditional basketball audiences. International media figures like Kay rarely weigh in on WNBA matters unless they perceive a cultural shift that transcends sports. Kay also touched on another crucial aspect of Clark's appeal, her ability to attract casual fans who might not otherwise watch women's basketball. She noted that the massive ratings for last year's NCAA tournament suggested that as many Americans were watching the women's college basketball as they were watching the men's, and directly attributed this shift to Clark's appeal. This crossover potential is the holy grail for any sport looking to expand its audience. The conversation also revealed Kay's understanding of how personality-driven sports marketing has become. She specifically asked whether women's basketball's growth is sustainable, if it depends on one or two personalities. This question cuts to the heart of the current debate about the WNBA's future. Is the recent surge in popularity a structural shift in how women's sports are perceived, or is it primarily driven by Clark's unique appeal? McNutt attempted to broaden the conversation to include other rising stars like Juju Watkins and Paige Bueckers, but Kay's questions consistently returned to Clark's singular impact. This persistent focus revealed Kay's assessment that while many players contribute to the sport's growth, Clark stands alone in her ability to attract mainstream attention and transform commercial expectations. Kay's perspective also touched on the challenges facing women athletes who become major public figures. She noted that women face pitfall after pitfall when trying to navigate fame and public scrutiny, acknowledging the additional burdens female athletes carry compared to their male counterparts. But even in this discussion, her framing suggested that Clark has been particularly adept at managing these challenges and maintaining her appeal despite the intense scrutiny. The interview also revealed something about how international observers perceive the sometimes contentious debate surrounding Clark and Reese in American media. Kay seemed puzzled by the occasional hostility in this discourse, noting that both players are tremendously talented and have contributed to the sport's growth. Her outsider perspective highlighted how the heated nature of some of these debates might seem excessive to international observers. What's particularly noteworthy about Kay's comments is that they came during what was ostensibly a business discussion rather than a sports analysis. She was focused on the commercial impact and market transformation of women's basketball, areas where Clark's influence has been undeniable. Even the most ardent Reese supporters would acknowledge that Clark has generated unprecedented media attention and commercial interest in the women's game. Toward the end of the interview, Kay directly addressed the question of how to ensure that new fans who have been drawn to women's basketball primarily because of Clark remain engaged with the sport long-term. This question reveals her understanding that Clark has brought in a significant number of viewers who weren't previously women's basketball fans, and that retaining these viewers is crucial for the sport's continued growth. McNutt's response to this question was telling. She acknowledged that some fans felt alienated for being huge fans of Caitlin Clark while others were frustrated by fans of Caitlin Clark, a diplomatic acknowledgement of the sometimes divisive nature of Clark's massive popularity. But even in this response, she centered Clark in the conversation, tacitly acknowledging Kay's premise that Clark has become the focal point of women's basketball discourse. In the broader context of sports media, Kay's willingness to express a clear preference for Clark's impact represents a departure from the careful balancing act many American commentators feel obligated to maintain. Her international perspective allowed her to cut through the political considerations that often shape U.S. sports discourse and express what many observers believe, but few state directly, that Clark has become the face of women's basketball globally, in a way that transcends any other current player. This isn't to diminish Reese's significant contributions to the sport's growing popularity. Her competitive fire, defensive prowess, and compelling personality have undoubtedly attracted many fans to women's basketball, but Kay's comments reflect a reality that many observers understand but few express directly, that Clark's impact on expanding the audience for women's basketball has been truly singular. The reaction to Kay's comments has been predictably divided, with Clark supporters pointing to them as validation from an objective international observer, while Reese fans see them as yet another example of media bias. But regardless of where one stands in this ongoing debate, Kay's perspective offers a valuable insight into how women's basketball is being perceived beyond American shores. As women's basketball continues its remarkable growth, voices like Kay's will become increasingly important in understanding the sport's global impact. Her willingness to speak directly about who she believes has driven this transformation offers a refreshing counterpoint to the sometimes overly cautious approach of American sports media. The ultimate takeaway from Kay's comments isn't that one player is inherently better than another. Rather, it's that Clark has tapped into something that transcends traditional basketball fandom and connected with audiences who might not otherwise watch women's sports. This crossover appeal is incredibly valuable for a sport looking to expand its reach, and Kay's recognition of this reality speaks to her understanding of sports media and marketing. As we look ahead to Clark's rookie WNBA season and beyond, Kay's perspective offers a valuable lens through which to understand the transformative moment women's basketball is experiencing. Whether one agrees with her assessment or not, her willingness to speak directly about these dynamics adds an important international dimension to the ongoing conversation about the future of women's basketball. The global impact of Caitlin Clark continues to grow, with respected BBC journalist Katty Kay now firmly on Team Clark. While the American media tries to balance coverage between Clark and Reese, international observers are boldly declaring Clark the true game-changer. Kay's perspective shows how Clark's influence has transcended borders, bringing women's basketball to audiences who never watched before. Want more exclusive analysis on how Clark is revolutionizing women's basketball worldwide? Hit that subscribe button now and ring the notification bell. Drop your thoughts below. Is Katty Kay right about Clark's singular impact, or is she missing Reese's contribution?